Hello, boys, girls, and families. Miss Gibaldi here, excited to share some information about food chains with you this week. So we are going to start with our material guide. Week 4, can you believe it? Let's go ahead and scroll down to science. And you can see outside of this video, your tasks this week will include 3 short readings and activities to go with them. And then your food chain final project, which is an assessment this week too. So I'm just gonna take you through these readings real quick so that you can see where to find them and the kinds of activities that we're asking you to do. It always takes a second to jump down, but here we go. You can see we just have some information here about food chains that you'll read through this week. Has some really great information, visuals, and examples for you. And then after you read each little segment or resource, you'll have an activity that looks like this, a fill-in-the-blank chart of some kind to just put a test to your knowledge that you learned from the information in the reading. Okay, so that would be the first reading and activity. And you can either go back to that link to see where it jumps next, or you can just scroll down. But either way, you can see here is your next segment. There is that chart up there. You would read this next paragraph and resource and look through the visuals and the captions and all those text features. And then try the chart on your own to, again, put your knowledge to the test. Okay, so if we'd scroll, or if you went back to that link, it would jump you right back here to that final section and chart or activity for you to complete before moving on to the assessment section beneath. Okay, so this then would be a rubric of sorts for your assessment. I'll let you guys take a look at that on your own time. We'll get into a quick overview about it in the end of this video, but for now I really want to focus on just some important information that we need to know about food chains. Okay, so we are going to go through those things together today in the form of some guided notes and photos. So I'm gonna go ahead and just stop this for a moment. All right, here we go. All right, so again, we are learning about food chains in this video and in our unit this week. And the first thing that a food chain starts with is energy. And our energy on this earth comes from the sun. The sun provides almost all the energy on earth. But when you think about how you absorb energy, we're not necessarily going to get that energy from going and standing in the sun, right? So let's take a moment to think, what are some other ways that we can absorb the energy from the sun to help us do the things that we do? What are you thinking? I'm thinking that we absorb our energy by eating food, right? And that's where the food chains come in, because the sun gives its energy first to the source of a plant, like these leaves here, and then that energy actually travels through a food chain to other organisms or living things, including us. So for example, the sun gives its energy to the plants. The plant then is eaten by a grasshopper, and he's now absorbed the energy from the leaves by eating it. Then the grasshopper is eaten by a skunk. So the skunk has now absorbed the energy that was given to the plant, eaten by the grasshopper, and then eaten by him. And then the skunk is eaten by an owl. And again, that owl is receiving the energy from all of these sources in our food chain that goes back to the sun. So in other words, a food chain is the path that energy, or the sun, follows and moves through organisms or living things, okay? When talking about food chains, there are categories that these organisms or living things fall under. There are producers, which are organisms that make its own food from the sunlight, air, and water. So before we'd mentioned the leaves, but this also comes in the forms of other plants and flowers as well. Those are where our food chains start, with our producers. The organisms can also be consumers. And consumers are just organisms that eat that plant or animal matter that has been given the energy from the sun. So for example, we have 3 different types of consumers we're going to talk about today. And those consumers are herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. Herbivores are organisms that eat only plants. So for example, cow. Omnivores are organisms that eat both plants and meat. So for example, humans, like us, typically have a diet that consists of both meat and vegetables. Carnivores are animals that eat strictly meat, like lions. Whenever you're considering whether or not a consumer is an herbivore, an omnivore, or a carnivore, it's great to do some research because you'd be surprised how many animals are actually omnivores, even those that you might assume are strictly carnivores, like the coyote, for example. The coyote typically has a diet that consists of meat, but it will also eat plant matter from time to time. Or a bear. Even though we consider a bear to be a major predator to other animals, it also eats a lot of plants and other vegetation, like berries. Apparently, bears love berries. Some other examples of herbivores or animals that eat strictly plants might include rabbits and chipmunks, for example. Other carnivores that eat strictly meat include wolves and tigers. Again, there's many other examples of each kind. You might be interested to do some research of your own to discover whether or not an animal is an herbivore, carnivore, or an omnivore that eats both plants and meat. That brings us to animals that are predators and animals that are prey. Prey are animals that are being hunted, whereas predators are animals that do the hunting. This comes back to animal relationships. So for example, if we're looking at the relationship between a fox and a rabbit, in this situation or relationship, the rabbit's going to be considered the prey because the fox is going to hunt and eventually eat that rabbit. So in this case, the fox would be the predator, the rabbit would be the prey. However, if we look at that same fox and the fox's relationship to another animal, like the great horned owl, that fox now has become the prey because the great horned owl is the predator. The great horned owl has the ability to eat the fox. So an animal can be considered both prey and predator depending on its relationship with another animal. Another thing to consider looking into some research for as well. Other organisms outside of producers and consumers includes decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that break down decayed or dead plants and animals into smaller pieces to be used again. So for example, earthworms and mushrooms or other fungi are considered decomposers. They are also an important part of our food chain because they help that cycle start again. All right, let's review. A producer is an organism that makes its own food from sunlight, air, and water. So an example of a producer would be grass or other plants or flowers. A consumer is an animal or a mammal like us that eats plants and animals. So again, the producers get their energy from the sun. They create their own energy from the sun. Consumers gain their energy by eating the producers that gain their energy from the sun. And then decomposers are the organisms that break down the dead plants and animals into smaller pieces to be used again, like mushrooms. Okay. Herbivores are animals that eat strictly plants, such as a chipmunk. Carnivores are animals that eat strictly meat, like a wolf. And omnivores are animals that eat a diet that consists of both plants and meat, like a bear. Predators are animals that hunt other animals. Prey are animals being hunted by those predators. Remember, those roles can change depending on the relationship. Your assessment this week is going to be to create your own food chain using examples, real examples from a specific habitat in real life. So looking at this example here, I was considering a woodlands habitat. These are all organisms that you would find in a forest or woodland setting together. They would all be receiving energy from one another based on their relationships. Okay. After you create your food chain and present it to us, we also want to see you identifying those important pieces of the food chain, those important vocabulary words that we've discussed today. So for example, after you create your food chain, you're also going to identify your producers and consumers. I'm just going to list one example to allow you guys to experience that on your own. But we need to see at least one producer and one consumer on your food chain. We would like to see what types of consumers you include on your food chain. So again, you may need to do a little research in this area, but from my own research, I knew that a grasshopper is an herbivore, whereas a skunk is an omnivore, and an owl is a carnivore. Oops. And then outside of discovering the types of consumers on your food chain, we would also like to see the predator and prey relationships of your food chain. So for example, our grasshopper is prey to the skunk. The skunk eats the grasshopper to receive the energy. The skunk is the predator to the grasshopper, but it is also prey to the owl, because the owl can then eat the skunk, which then makes the owl a predator. Right, and that is an overview of your assessment this week. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to contact me or the other third grade teachers. Don't forget to work on those readings and charts within the Phase 2 packet as well, and complete your research as needed. We can't wait to see what you guys come up with. You got this. Until next time, take care. Bye.